We'll start this morning with some big breaking news.
The United States military has conducted another deadly strike in international waters off the coast of South America, killing 3 people aboard a vessel allegedly transporting illegal narcotics from Venezuela. The announcement was made by former U.S. President Donald Trump in a Truth Social post, sparking immediate debate over the legality of such an operation and its potential to escalate already tense relations with Caracas. According to Trump, the vessel was part of what he called a Venezuelan-backed trafficking route attempting to smuggle drugs into international markets. While no details have yet been independently confirmed regarding the identity of the vessel, the nationalities of those killed, or the exact nature of the cargo, Trump celebrated the strike as a victory for American security and a warning to what he described as narco-states operating in the Western Hemisphere. His language reflects a familiar theme in his foreign policy rhetoric, where he consistently tied drug trafficking, organized crime, and hostile governments together as a threat to U.S. sovereignty. The incident underscores the continued U.S. military presence in the Caribbean and South American waters, where American forces have been active for decades in counter-narcotics operations. Since the 1980s, Washington has framed the drug trade originating from South America as a direct national security threat, justifying extensive surveillance, interdictions, and military involvement. While previous administrations leaned heavily on intelligence cooperation and policing measures, Trump's approach has often favored decisive shows of military strength to demonstrate deterrence. Venezuela has long stood at the center of U.S. accusations over drug trafficking. Washington has charged numerous officials from Nicolas Maduro's government with collusion in cocaine shipments, and the U.S. Justice Department even indicted Maduro himself on narcotics and corruption allegations in 2020. Trump regularly portrayed the Venezuelan state as both illegitimate and criminal, and his post announcing the strike reiterated that line, accusing the country's leadership of facilitating routes that poison international markets with illicit drugs. Venezuela has consistently denied such charges, framing them as politically motivated attempts to justify sanctions and military pressure. The decision to carry out a lethal strike in international waters raises sharp questions under international law. Maritime law generally protects vessels on the high seas from attack, except in cases of piracy, imminent threats, or operations explicitly authorized by international agreements. Critics argue that conducting a military strike without presenting evidence or pursuing judicial process risks undermining the principle of freedom of navigation and sets a dangerous precedent for unilateral action. While the U.S. government has often justified drone strikes and military operations under the doctrine of self-defense, extending that justification to drug trafficking vessels is controversial and legally tenuous. Unless Washington can demonstrate that the ship posed an imminent threat, many scholars argue the proportionality of the response is questionable. The diplomatic consequences may be just as serious as the legal ones. Venezuela is almost certain to condemn the strike as an act of aggression, portraying it as proof of Washington's interventionist agenda. Other South American governments, even those not aligned with Caracas, may express unease at the precedent of U.S. forces unilaterally launching attacks in international waters near their coastlines. For nations like Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina, which balance cooperation with Washington against regional independence, the strike could spark new debates over sovereignty and security. International organizations such as the United Nations and the Organization of American States could become venues for diplomatic confrontation, with allies and critics of the U.S. pressing for accountability. Trump's announcement also illustrates his ongoing reliance on military operations as political theater. During his presidency, he frequently highlighted targeted killings and military strikes as proof of American resolve and superiority. The killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in 2020 was presented as a defining moment of strength, and his new declaration about the strike off South America follows the same pattern. Domestically, his supporters will likely hail the move as an example of his toughness on crime and narcotics, framing it as a direct defense of American families against the flow of drugs. His critics, however, argue that such unilateral strikes lack transparency, accountability, and long-term effectiveness in addressing the deep-rooted causes of trafficking. The human toll of the incident cannot be ignored. 3 people have been reported killed, but nothing has been confirmed about who they were. Were they traffickers knowingly engaged in smuggling, or were they low-level crew members forced into labor by organized crime syndicates in past counter-narcotics operations? There have been cases of fishermen and civilians mistakenly targeted, raising concerns about the risks of overreach. Without independent investigation, the identities of the deceased and the justification for the strike remain unknown, leaving families and human rights organizations demanding clarity. Beyond the immediate casualties, the strike represents another escalation in a long and bitter cycle of confrontation between Washington and Caracas. Each new U.S. military or economic action provokes fiery condemnation from the Venezuelan government, which in turn hardens the stance of American policymakers. Rather than deterring the Maduro regime, analysts warn that such tactics often serve to strengthen its domestic narrative of resistance against imperialism, reinforcing Maduro's hold on power by appealing to nationalist sentiment. The broader implications for regional stability are significant. South America has historically resisted large-scale militarization of its waters, favoring cooperative approaches to security challenges. Unilateral U.S. strikes risk undermining those cooperative frameworks and creating new sources of friction between Washington and governments that may otherwise share its concerns about trafficking. Furthermore, if incidents like this become more frequent, they could lead to accidental confrontations with local naval forces or even miscalculations that spiral into broader conflict. Supporters of the strike argue that decisive action is necessary because narcotics trafficking has devastating consequences for communities across the Americas. They contend that the networks profiting from cocaine and other drugs are well armed, deeply entrenched, and shielded by corrupt governments. From this perspective, military action sends a powerful deterrent message to traffickers and their state backers that they will be pursued and punished. Critics counter that the decades-long U.S. war on drugs has repeatedly demonstrated the limitations of militarized strategies. Despite countless interdictions, arrests, and billions of dollars spent, drug supplies to the U.S. and Europe remain steady, and trafficking organizations continue to adapt and thrive. As the international community digests the news of the strike, much remains uncertain. The details of the operation, the identities of those killed, and the evidence behind Trump's claims have not been independently verified. Venezuela's response, once delivered, could inflame tensions further, while regional governments will weigh the risks of either supporting or criticizing Washington. Legal experts will continue to debate the justification of lethal force in such circumstances, while families and human rights groups call for transparency about the human cost. For Trump, however, the calculation appears clear. By publicizing the strike himself, he reinforces his image as a leader willing to take bold, uncompromising action against threats abroad. For his supporters, this demonstrates strength. For his critics, it highlights the dangers of a policy driven more by political messaging than by adherence to international law or long-term strategy. The deaths of 3 people in international waters may yet become another flashpoint in the complex and often fraught relationship between the United States, Venezuela, and the broader South American region, symbolizing both the reach of American power and the controversies that follow its use.